From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
This is a pattern of the NYPD, and this film is very connected to the surveilling and spying on the Muslim American community. If you're showing a film that says Muslims are terrorists, that Muslims are prone to terrorism, that Muslims are not patriotic, that you need to watch out for these people, they're suspicious, then it makes sense why we would have a demographic unit that is focusing on 25 ancestries of interest, including black Muslims.
A coalition of Muslim and interfaith groups are calling on New York Police Commissioner Ray Kelly to resign after the department showed an inflammatory anti-Muslim film to nearly 1,500 officers in training. Then we look at the money behind Newt Gingrich's surge. Mega-billionaire casino mogul Sheldon Adelson and his wife had given $10 million to help elect Gingrich, largely because of his views on Israel.
I think that we've had an invented Palestinian people who are in fact Arabs and were historically part of the Arab community. And they had a chance to go many places. And for a variety of political reasons, we have sustained this war against Israel now since the 1940s. I think it's tragic.
And we'll look at how immigration is emerging as a key issue in the Republican race ahead of Florida's primary Tuesday.
Not anti-immigrant. My father was born in Mexico. My wife's father was born in Wales. They came to this country. The idea that I'm anti-immigrant is repulsive.
All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Republican presidential candidates gathered in Jacksonville, Florida Thursday night for their final debate before Tuesday's primary. The two presumed frontrunners, Newt Gingrich and Mitt Romney, sparred over immigration as part of a bid to court Florida's Latino voters. Gingrich and Romney also exchanged words in their ongoing spat over who's closest tied to Wall Street firms that helped cause the nation's financial crisis.
We discovered to our shock, Governor Romney owns shares of both Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Governor Romney made $1 million off of selling some of that. Governor Romney owns share and has an investment in Goldman Sachs, which is today foreclosing on Floridians. So maybe Governor Romney, in the spirit of openness, should tell us how much money he's made off of how many households that have been foreclosed by his investments.
My investments are not made by me. My investments for the last 10 years have been in a blind trust, managed by a trustee. Secondly, the investments that they made, we've learned about this as we made our financial disclosure, have been in mutual funds and bonds. I don't own stock in either Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac.
We'll have more from the Republican debate later in the newscast. President Obama continues his post-State of the Union speaking tour with a swing through western states. On Thursday, Obama told a crowd in Las Vegas he hopes to boost domestic energy production, including drilling for natural gas.
The experts believe it could support more than 600,000 jobs by the end of the decade. We, it turns out, are the Saudi Arabia of natural gas. We've got a lot of it. We've got a lot of it. America will develop this resource without putting the health and safety of our citizens at risk. But we've got to keep at it. We've got to take advantage of this incredible natural resource.
A new spending plan from the Pentagon would limit pay raises and institute other cuts to conventional military while escalating special operations and increasing the nation's drone fleet. The Pentagon budget for next year is $525 billion, which is $6 billion less than this year. But despite plans for $487 billion in cuts over the next decade, the Pentagon's base budget, which does not include the cost of an ongoing war in Afghanistan, is expected to increase, reaching $567 billion by 2017. Despite the removal of troops from Iraq, the Pentagon's requested $88.4 billion beyond the base budget to pay for overseas combat next year. Defense Secretary Leon Panetta detailed the proposed spending plan at the Pentagon.
Specifically, the department will request for its base budget $525 billion in its base budget for fiscal year FY13. And by the way, that compares to $531 billion in fiscal year 2012. And our hope and plan here is to try to rise to $567 billion by fiscal 2017. Make no mistake, the savings that we are proposing will impact on all 50 states. and many districts, congressional districts across America. This will be a test of whether reducing the deficit is about talk or about action.
In Iraq, at least 32 people have been killed, another 50 wounded in a bombing in the capital, Baghdad. The attack hit a funeral procession for 3 family members killed Thursday. It was the latest explosion to hit Baghdad amidst a wave of escalating violence. On Thursday, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton addressed the Iraq violence, calling on Iraq not to, quote, blow this opportunity in the wake of the recent U.S. troop withdrawal. Clinton's comments come as the Iraqi government has announced plans to take legal action over the 2005 Haditha massacre after the last U.S. service member involved walked away with no jail time earlier this week. Frank Wuterich was the last of 8 Marines charged for involvement in the killing of 24 Iraqi civilians. None have received jail term. On Thursday, an advisor to Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki said the Iraqi government's exploring unspecified legal recourse on behalf of the victims' families. For more on the Haditha massacre, you can go to our website at democracynow.org for our interview with the reporter who broke the story, Tim McGurk. The U.S. has threatened to withhold annual aid to the Egyptian military after Egypt barred at least 6 Americans from leaving the country. Among those held back is the son of Transportation Secretary Ray LaHood, Sam LaHood, who directs the Egyptian program of the Institutional Republican Institute, the International Republican Institute. The group's Cairo office was raided last month by Egyptian authorities, along with the offices of 2 other U.S.-backed organizations. In Washington, State Department spokesperson Victoria Nuland called on Egypt to allow the Americans' departure without delay.
We have several U.S. citizens working at various international non-governmental organizations in Egypt that have been questioned by judges in Egypt, and they are currently not being allowed to depart Egypt in connection with the government's investigation of NGOs. We are urging the government of Egypt to lift these restrictions immediately and allow folks to come home as soon as possible, and we are hopeful that this issue will be resolved in nearest days.
Activists in Syria are reporting what's been described as, quote, a terrifying massacre in the city of Homs. Witnesses say more than 30 people, including small children, were killed in an attack by the forces of President Bashar al-Assad. The reported killings come as the uprising against Assad has moved closer to the capital, Damascus. On Thursday, rebel fighters clashed with government forces in the town of Douma, just north of Damascus. The UN Security Council is expected to take up the fighting in Syria during a closed-door session today. In Guatemala, former military dictator Efraín Ríos Montt has been ordered to stand trial on accusations of genocide and other crimes during this 17-month-long rule. Montt seized power in 1982 in a military coup, has been accused of overseeing the murders of over 17,000 political opponents and dissidents. On Thursday, a Guatemalan judge ruled there's sufficient evidence for Montt to face charges for a single massacre of indigenous peasants. Outside the courtroom, protesters demanded Montt be tried.
We want justice because these cases cannot remain unpunished. There are thousands and thousands of brothers, children, men and women who were massacred during the internal armed conflict, and what we are asking now is justice. We are all present here. It doesn't matter if it's hot or cold. We want justice.
Montt has been placed under house arrest until a preliminary hearing in March. The annual gathering of people's movements at the World Social Forum continues in Brazil. Thousands have traveled to Brazil's Rio Grande do Sul to meet under the theme of capitalist crisis, social and environmental justice. On Thursday, the Brazilian President Dilma Rousseff called for a grassroots mobilization ahead of the upcoming Rio +20 conference on sustainable development.
This is the hope that brings us together and mobilizes us to Rio +20. This is the hope that must always guide us in the search for a new way of life, more inclusive and sustainable.
The U.S. Senate has voted to further increase the debt limit by $1.2 trillion to $16.4 trillion. The 52-44 vote came mostly along party lines, with Democrats rejecting a recent measure from the Republican-controlled House to freeze the debt hike. 2 former aides to Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker are facing charges they participated in political fundraising on public time. The aides worked for Walker when he was Milwaukee County executive. An investigation found Walker's office used a private email network to communicate campaign-related material in 2010. Another former Walker employee was recently charged with embezzling thousands of dollars from a fund for the families of U.S. soldiers. Walker's facing a potential recall following his attempts to slash the rights of public sector unions. And the FBI is asking software developers to produce an application that would comb social networks, including Facebook and Twitter, to detect potential security threats, as well as creating maps to display the information. Privacy groups raised concerns after the FBI posted the request for a social media monitoring application earlier this month. It calls for software that could, quote, enhance techniques for collecting and sharing open-source actionable intelligence, unquote. In other social media news, Twitter says it's developed the ability to block tweets in specific countries while keeping them visible to the rest of the world. Twitter users have expressed concern the technology could limit free speech. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Juan Gonzalez. Welcome to all of our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world.